Hello, everyone. I'm not feeling well today, and so I'm going to put this lecture, the last of the lecture for the exam on Thursday. Hopefully, I will be feeling well when I get back on Thursday. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure I go over the last of the stuff that y'all need to be discussed for the information for the exams. Uh, there will be online, there will be in Blackboard copies of the lecture notes as long with this video. And so watch this video and then study all the lecture notes that you've had and have gotten since the beginning of the semester. Okay, well, I think for most of you left off, we were talking about poverty in Texas, the fact that Texas has a relatively high level of poverty. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that Texas tends to have a low level of education, okay, particularly amongst minorities. Uh, the fact that particularly African Americans and Hispanics tend to have a much lower level of college attainment or even high school attainment than Anglos and Asians means that they're much more likely to be poor than someone who is Anglo or someone who is Asian. Okay. Other issues. Uh, One of the things that Texas has suffered from for a very long time is a lack of well paying, low to medium skilled jobs, particularly in things like manufacturing. Most of the low to medium skilled jobs that Texas has are in the service industry. That would be people who are like waiters or waitresses, or people who work in the hotel industry, these kind of jobs. And the problem with these jobs is they really don't pay well. Their employers, although they might work 40 hours and all this kind of stuff, just like a manufacturing job would, they're not able, okay, to have a consistent level of production. One of the advantages that people who work in manufacturing have is that the owners of the factory are able to set a pace that workers are able to achieve and maintain for, say, 8 hours a day when they're at work. And so people who work in manufacturing, they tend to have a consistent, or much more consistent, level of production. The amount of value that they provide during their workday tends to be relatively high and relatively consistent. People who work in the service industries, while they can work very, very hard, they often go through periods where they're incredibly busy, where they are literally doing stuff as fast as they can. And they may do that for an hour or two, and whatever business that they're working for is making good money. They're producing a lot of value. And then you can go through a period in which you have very little business, that they don't have enough customers to even cover their cost. Okay. And so by the time you average it all out, the value that they add to whatever product that they're providing just isn't that high, not relative to someone who, say, working in manufacturing. It's not that their jobs aren't important. It's not that they're not providing important services and stuff. And we saw that with the pandemic, with many of the people who work in the service industry became quote unquote essential personnel because we very much need them to help society function. The only thing is despite how essential they don't provide a lot of value added. Their work simply isn't consistently high enough, providing enough value for their employers to pay them a much higher rate. Okay. And so, Texas, in many ways, we skipped over having low to minimum skill manufacturing right into the high skills. We talked about Elon Musk with Tesla and SpaceX. We talked about Michael Dell with Dell Computers there in Austin. We talked about all of these kind of things. And these are very high level manufacturing. The skills required to do much of that work is very, very high. And so they make a really good living. But there's not a lot of then lower skilled jobs, okay, where they're building things or they're putting together things, that kind of stuff. And so one issue is that this lack of well paying, low to medium skilled jobs. Okay. The fact that you're lucky if you can find one, if you're not educated, if you don't have a college degree, if you don't have some kind of certification like welding or plumbing, or like we talked about in class, being a maintenance worker for the windmills, you're going to have a relatively hard time finding a job that pays decent. Generally speaking, these workers, if they find decent paying jobs, it's usually with government, where they go to work for a school district or they go to work for the city. And they get paid better than what the equivalent workers in the private sector do, on top of often getting much better benefits like health insurance, retirement, except days off, sick leave, etc. Well, the last major issue that Texas faced when it comes to not having a relatively high level of poverty is that Texas has a relatively large percentage of illegal immigrants in our population. So we've discussed, the RGV, we're right here on the border with Mexico. Many of the immigrants who come in, okay, especially those who do not have a valid visa, tend to have very low levels of education. Sixth grade is usually about the highest they have, and usually it's less than that because they don't have a work visa. Their ability to defend themselves against exploitation in the workplace is very limited. It's really hard if you don't have a valid work visa. If your employer says, "I'm not going to pay you 725, I'm going to pay you five," well, who are you going to go complain to? I mean, if you go complain to the federal government, and you have the legal right to, you can go complain to the Department of Labor. Said, "Hey, they're only paying me $5 instead of 725." The only thing is, you got to sit there and admit that you're in the country illegally, which can cause problems. You can really easily find yourself being turned over to Border Patrol and potentially face deportation. And so, because Texas has a relatively high level, people who are in the country without a valid work visa tend to make relatively little money because they got to take whatever jobs they can find. They have to find people who are willing to pay them kind of often underneath the table, or they have to steal people's identity. They have to steal somebody else's social security number so that they can then work. Of course, now this is not optimum as well for a number of reasons. First of all, that's a crime. Second of all, the people's social security number they steal, even if they don't plan on doing anything nefarious, it can cause problems for them, especially if you're a young kid and you're thinking you're going to be getting financial aid because your family makes relatively little money. But the people look at it and they say, "Well, no, you've been making all this money for years." Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you're supposed to start working when you were like 1 year old. Okay, nobody gets a job when they're 1 year old, but it can cause a whole lot of problems. The other issue for them is then that they pay in a lot of taxes, particularly Medicare and Social Security tax. Roughly about 8% of their salary that they earn goes into those two programs that they will never be able to access. They cannot prove that they have paid into the system without admitting to the fact that they committed identity theft. And even then, it would be hard for them to prove that, yeah, they were the one, it's their money, blah, blah, blah. And so immigrants have been for decades paying into Social Security, keeping Social Security viable longer because they've paid in billions of dollars in Social Security taxes that they never are going to never have a chance to pull out. And so other people who were able to work legally, whether U.S. citizens or someone who had a legal work visa, they have their benefits are better or stronger the system's stronger because you have these people who are paying all of this money into it that can't get it out. And so those are some of the major reasons why Texas has such a higher relative poverty rate compared to the rest of the nation. Okay, and we're on the, as far as where we are, we're on the bottom half as far as how bad our poverty is. Well, like so many things in life, when you look at poverty, poverty is not evenly distributed. Some groups are much more likely to be poor than others. Okay. And so when you look at poverty, when I ask classes, who's the least likely to live in poverty of the four major groups, Anglos, Asians, Hispanics, and African Americans, most classes will answer Asians. And that's wrong. Now, it's very understandable because, we just talked about maybe the class before that Asians have the highest median income, $10,000 more than the Anglo population does. And so you would think, well, if they have the highest incomes, they should then have the lowest level of poverty. When in fact, the Anglo population has the lowest level of poverty. Anglos have about a 9.9% poverty rate. And it sits at about that rate pretty consistently. Okay, now, if we go into a recession, it will go up, but once we come out, it goes back down. But why would Anglos have a lower poverty rate than Asians, despite the fact they make $10,000 less median income a year? Well, it has a lot to do with the situation that the Anglo population have found themselves in. Anglos for 140 something years here in Texas, and for over 200 years nationally, have always been the dominant political and economic force. They controlled and still control virtually everything. Okay, now at some point in the future, in the next few decades, that will change, and it is changing right now. But at some point, that will no longer be the case. But historically, it was. And so one of the things that meant was not only do more Anglos per capita than most other people other than Asians go to college, is particularly amongst what you might want to call the working class, people who just have jobs. They are often in a position where they're able to get some of the better working class jobs. They historically had the contacts, family, friends, whatever, and they were able to get some of the better working class jobs, working in industries like construction or whatnot. They also then often had the pull. They had the ability to use connections to then give them some of the better jobs. So, for example, it's very, very common for young men, regardless of their race or ethnicity, if they go to work in construction, your first year or so, you're literally just doing grunt work. Your manager has a trailer with 180-pound bags of concrete on it. He needs to go check something else. When he comes back, he needs that trailer emptied. And so he tells you to empty that trailer. And it's just a job that requires brute strength. And so everybody you generally starts off doing that type of work. But if you're Anglo, particularly historically, you also were in a better position than to try to move into some of the more value added jobs. Okay, so for example, maybe your uncle works for the construction company that you got a job for. He got you a job there. He has known the foreman for decades. And he goes to the foreman after you've been there a year or two and says, hey, my nephew really would like to start learning how to use heavy equipment, learn how to use a bulldozer, backhoe, maintainer, etc. And so they do one or two things. They let you learn on the job, or maybe they let you go to some school for a little while to learn the basics. Either way, if you get that skill training, if you learn how to use maintainers, you learn how to use the bulldozers, you learn how to use the backhoes, learn how to use all this heavy equipment, you are now a much more valuable worker for that company. You're going to see a fairly significant increase in your pay when you're able to start doing those kinds of work. In addition, you're also more likely to work more consistently. One of the issues with construction, it can be boom or bust. You either have a lot of work and you're making good money, your job work ends, and then you may go months before you get picked up for another job. Well, if you're able to handle all the really heavy equipment that is a specialized skill, or you have other specialized skills, often you already have your next assignment before your current assignment ends. Okay, because there's only so many people in the company that knows how to use this equipment, and so if the owner has another job coming up, chances are he or she are going to need someone to do the heavy equipment, and you're going to be able to get the job. And so, because Anglos have always been in a position to get some of the better paying jobs, even ones that don't require necessarily a lot of skills, construction, working for government, these kind of things, it lowers their poverty rate because a lot of the jobs they were able to get paid just good enough or pay good enough to keep you out of poverty. Now, you may not be enough to live a great lifestyle. You can't live by home in the nicer neighborhoods and buy the nicer vehicles or any of that stuff, but you're not going to be close to being poor. For Asians, one of the reasons why they have a higher poverty rate but I'll say it's about a 20% increase. They have about a 12% poverty rate, okay, which is not 2% more, that's 20% more. One of the big reasons is a significant part of the Asian population does not do well academically, and they don't have the access to the better paying minimum skilled jobs like Anglos have. And so they come in second, fairly close, only 20% more, or 2 out of 10, if you want to look at it that way. And so Anglos and Asians have very low relative poverty rates. Well, what group then comes in third? Well, this would be Hispanics. Hispanics have the third highest poverty rate of right about 27%. So if you look at it, it's almost 3 times higher than what the Anglo population has. It's better than twice the poverty rate of what the Asian population has. Well, why do Hispanics have such a high poverty rate? Well, again, it goes back partly to education. If you are Hispanic, you're much less likely to graduate high school. If you manage to graduate high school, which a lot of people do, you are much less likely to go to college. If you do go to college, you tend to go to less prestigious colleges. You often will go to a community or junior college first, which, by the way, there's no harm in that. There's no real negative to that. Yours truly went to a junior college straight out of high school because all the senior colleges said no thanks. Okay. But there is a problem with community and junior colleges in that the dropout rates of people who attend are much, much higher. Okay. If you are a first generation college student going to a community college right out of high school, you have a very good chance of not finishing a college degree within 6 years. Okay. One of the advantages that many Anglo students have, even once they go to community or junior colleges, they often have at least one parent or somebody that's close family friend that is a college graduate. And they're able to provide guidance. And it may be simply something as simple as, hey, you're through your junior year. Hey, you only got 1 year left to go. Keep at it. Before you know it, you'll be graduating. And that is a powerful message for someone to get. And so if you're Hispanic, you're less likely to graduate from college. Well, for those who do graduate, and the numbers are growing. They're increasing significantly. You're less likely to graduate with the degrees that pay the best because you tend to come from lower ranked institutions. You're not going to be competing quite as well for some of the better jobs, particularly compared to what Asians and to a lesser extent Anglos. And so that lowers your income threshold, how much money you're likely to make. And disproportionate part of the Hispanic population is most likely to work in working class jobs that don't pay quite as well. Okay. And so that is a major issue. Another major issue for Hispanics compared to Anglos and Asians. If you are Hispanic, you are far more likely to be what's known as the near poor. What I mean by near poor is that you're technically not poor. You're above the line that the government has set for being considered technically poor. Now, you got to realize there's a difference between what the government says somebody is poor and what you and I and most people in society may think is someone's poor. Those are two different things, or can be anyway. Okay. And so, if you're a Hispanic, you're much more likely to be what's known as near poor, which basically means you're just one job loss, you're just a couple of missed paychecks away, you're one sickness away from going from not being in poverty to being in poverty. Matter of fact, most people who are in quote unquote poverty, they don't stay in poverty throughout the entire year. They will bump up and in and out of poverty throughout the year. So, for example, let's say you're a young woman, you have a couple of kids, you're a single mom. You work as a checker at Walmart, and you normally work about 35 hours a week. With the amount of money that they're paying you, with the fact that you have two kids, and you're single, you're the only income, you're technically below the poverty rate. And so you're technically living in poverty. But then comes around the holiday season. And across the road from your Walmart is a Target. And Target needs to hire for the holiday season. So you go across the street, and the manager there at Target hires you to work during the holiday rush when they need as many people as they can. And so you're able to get another 20 hours a week or so. Well, during that 3 month period that you're working the holiday rush for Target, in addition to Walmart, all of a sudden you bump up above poverty. You're no longer in poverty, you're above poverty. And so you stay above poverty for a few months until the holiday season's end. Once the holiday season ends, Target no longer needs you to work those extra hours. And so you stop working at Target, you go back to your regular work schedule there at Walmart, and you fall back into poverty. And so this is a particular issue for Hispanics and African Americans, is that you're so close to being poor. And one of the real big issues for African Americans and Hispanics when it comes to this is they tend not to have much in the way of wealth. They don't have a lot of money to fall back on. If you look at the typical Hispanic compared to the typical Anglo, the typical Anglo generally has about 7 or 8 times the wealth of a typical Hispanic, meaning they own a home that it has value and they have equity in. Maybe they got cash in the bank, maybe a 3 to 6 months emergency fund. They have been saving for retirement. And so if they get sick or if they lose their job, they don't immediately fall into poverty. They're able to, for a while, pay their bills. And it gives them extra time to try to go get another job. Whereas if you're Hispanic, chances are, if you're in that near poor category, one job loss, one sickness where you're sick for a couple of months, okay, can throw your family's finances in disarray. All of a sudden, you're in poverty. You have things like have your vehicle repo because you couldn't make the car payments. You're being kicked out of your apartment because you're not paying rent, because you don't have any income and you didn't have any money to fall back on. And so, one of the big reasons why Hispanics have a higher poverty rate is that relative lack of wealth. The fact that most Hispanics don't have much in the way of wealth. Okay. Not compared to their Anglo and Asian counterparts. Okay. And so for Hispanics, a big chunk of it is that they uh, just don't have the wealth. And so they have a much higher poverty rate when they lose their jobs, that kind of stuff. And the last group, and we're just going to talk about it briefly, is African Americans. They have a little bit above a 27% poverty rate. They slightly higher than for Hispanics. And they have pretty much all the same issues that Hispanics have, except for maybe immigration that pulls them into poverty. But all the other issues that we discussed about problems that Hispanics can have and that kind of stuff that cause them to have less money, to be more likely to be poor, they make less money, all that kind of stuff, they have less wealth. All of that is true for African Americans and tends to be a little bit worse. Okay, that is the last of the lecture for the exam. Hopefully, I will be feeling well enough uh, to come to work on Thursday. If not, we'll see what I have to do. You might have to have the one of the counselors uh, kind of do the test, monitor the test, proctor the test for me, since you can take it online anyway. And so, if I don't see you Thursday, I hope that I'll see you then after spring break. Okay. If anybody got questions, you can contact me through the Blackboard, or even better would be through Pronto. You'll have a good day.